Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Welcome back to part 3 of my Dungeons & Dragons Buyer's Guide. Today's video we're going to be looking at Dungeons & Dragons version 3.5. So this is the one that most people remember when they talk about 3rd edition. This came out in 2003 and ran until 2008. And this is the revised version of 3rd edition. If you want to know more on the differences between 3.5 and 3.0, I did do a retrospective on Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, so you can certainly check that out. But in this video I just want to talk about some of the books that I would consider to be the most worthwhile or essential books to pick up if you're looking to run a 3.5 Dungeons & Dragons game, as well as a whole host of other ones that are also good buys or worth picking up if you're looking for some other options to expand your game. So without further ado, let's have a look at Dungeons & Dragons 3.5. Alright, so here we have the core rulebooks, Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master Guide, and Monster Manual. Now the one thing I want you to note is these particular versions here are actually the 2012 reprints, which I will discuss in a little bit more detail later on in the video. The covers do look a little bit different. So the reason that I'm showing these is after I bought these reprints, I actually gave away my copy of the Monster Manual to a friend of mine who was looking to use it to run a Pathfinder game since he didn't have any of the bestiaries or didn't actually have the 3.5 Monster Manual. So I gave him those, but I still have my original Player's Handbook. So this is what the original cover actually looked like, and this is the one that I was holding earlier in the video. And I've got the Dungeon Master's Guide here as well. So this is what the Dungeon Master's Guide looks like. And that's the 3.5. Now the 3.5 ones will also say 3.5 on the bottom, so that's a big thing to look for if you're looking to purchase and run this version of the game. One thing I have seen as a common thing online, I'm just going to move this out of the way for now. One of the common things that I have seen is people listing 3.5 players' handbooks, for example, for sale, and the picture is wrong. So I've corrected a few people on this before, and they've always seemed to be grateful. Whoops, sorry, didn't mean to bump you there. But this is the 3.5 Player's Handbook, and this is the 3.0 Player's Handbook. This is the one that I've often seen at times advertised as the 3.5. So there are very obvious things to look for that are differences. For example, you want to make sure it has the 3.5 on the bottom there, but even just the details of the book itself, you've got like more of a silver thing up here. You've got this section with the jewels and the orb surrounding the sword. The sword also has the sword and book also has like a silver backing. So that's just something that you want to look for when it comes to the differences between 3.5 and 3.0. If you're just looking on like auction sites or online listings, because sometimes they will have this version here and they'll list it as 3.5, and a lot of times it's just an honest mistake. But it's just something to be wary of, okay? When it comes to the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual, one of the easy things you can do is just look at the page count, because the Monster Manual for 3.5 and the Dungeon Master's Guide for 3.5 expanded their pages quite a bit, so that all three of the core books have the same the same page count now. The artwork is pretty much the same though between the 3.0 and the 3.5. With a few exceptions, but not really too many worth noting here. So those are the core books. So the next thing I want to do is just talk about a few other books that I would consider to be highly important, or maybe even close to essential, for people looking to run or play 3.5. So one of the books that I highly recommend picking up is the Player's Handbook 2. This book is absolutely fantastic. I absolutely love it, and what it has is it has new options for each of the classes, including a few new ones, but it also has like your classic classes with basically alternate features. So for example, you can make a druid, if I can find them here. So you can make a druid that has basically different abilities. So it would lose the wild shape, but it gains like shape-shifting abilities that enhance its stats, similar to the Barbarian's Rage. And one of the big downfalls of 3.5 is how they handle things like wild shape. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on that right yet, but anyway, this is a really great book, and the Druid is so much better for having those abilities. There's all kinds of great feats and other aspects in here as well, so there's a lot of really great stuff in this book. Highly recommend it, and consider it to be almost essential for anyone looking to run or play 3.5 Dungeons & Dragons. Alright, up next is a book that's pretty much, I would say, more or less designed for beginners. So if you're a veteran player, you don't necessarily need to pick this up, but if you're brand new and you're looking to get into 3.5, the Dungeon Master's Guide 2 is an excellent resource for beginners. It goes over a lot of information, like things like how to design settlements to non-player characters, and it gives like some new lower powered magic items that you can use in exchange for other ones. So like they have, I think it's like instead of like a flaming longsword, you can have a flaming surge longsword, which lets you add extra d6 fire damage a certain number of times per day. But it's a gold piece modification instead of adding like an extra +1 to the cost of the item. So there's some cool things like that in here. Again, this is something that's really great for beginners, and I would say that it's more important for beginners than for established players. There is also a fully fleshed out settlement called Saltmarsh in here as well. If I can find it right quick, I'm not going to worry about it too much. Yeah, so we got Saltmarsh is fully fleshed out here in a great starting area if you're brand new to Dungeons & Dragons, and specifically to designing stuff for 3.5. Now, there were other monster manuals as well. They went for monster manuals 3, 4, and 5 were all part of the 3.5 brand. There was a monster manual 2 for 3.0. Honestly, I didn't really like that one too much, and I'm not too keen on Monster Manual 3, truth be told. But Monster Manual 4 and 5 are fantastic. I don't have 5. I don't know why I didn't buy it at the time. I think I was just short on money, and you know, the person I was living with owned a game store. But as it turns out, shortly after this came out, he ended up actually having to close the store. So I missed my opportunity to get Monster Manual 5. But Monster Manual 4 is absolutely fantastic. And the reason that's fantastic is that unlike the Monster Manuals 2 and 3, which try to focus more on higher level stuff, this goes away to kind of expanding on lower level encounters. You know, and it reintroduces some classic monsters, like we've got gnolls, and different types. So instead of just being like a generic gnoll, they have like a fiendish cleric of Yinogu, slave taker. But what's also great, what's also fantastic about this is this book also has random maps thrown in, so that you can use, if you're just looking to kind of pick up something and throw it in as a random idea. These are a great resource for that. There's tons of these maps scattered throughout the book, as well as, again, just some restatted versions of classic D&D monsters, so it fleshes them out a bit more. So you actually have a variety of, like, say, orcs to choose from. If you want to have an encounter with orcs, it takes some of that work out. So it's great that it does a lot more with the lower level stuff, whereas the other ones focus a bit too much, I think, on, like, you know, challenge rating 12 or above type thing. So this is an absolutely fantastic book. All right, another one that I'd say is flat out required. I mean, not necessarily required. I mean, the Player's Handbook, D&G, and Monster Manual are really all that you need, but there's some, you know, infinitely useful resources, and the Spell Compendium is one of them. This book is fantastic. It's filled with spells from all kinds of, like, it just collects them from all kinds of different resources, like different supplement books, dungeon or dragon magazines, like all kinds of places that had spells in the past. They reproduce them here. And what's great about this is that they don't overlap with the Player's Handbook spells, meaning that all the spells that are in here are different from what's in the Player's Handbook, so you don't feel like you're getting a lot of the repeated information if you buy them both. One complaint that was leveled against this is that they dropped the unique names from the books. So, for example, they got rid of, like, the Melf spells. It's just referred to as, like, Acid Arrow. You know, the Tensor spells were renamed. But the fact of the matter is that you don't really need to worry about that as much. just because like the player's handbook still has all that stuff in there. There's still all that, all those things in there. But what this did is I think it made it so that these could be added to the SRD, or the open gaming license, whereas the ones with like Melf's Acid Arrow and Big B's Crushing Hand and all that stuff, those properties were very specific to Wizards of the Coast and would not be made available for the SRD and the open gaming license. So I think that's one of the reasons that they made that change. It's a minor thing, but some people have complained about it. But this is just a book filled with spells, and there's some awesome spells in here as well. So it gives you some variety over the player's handbook. Now, if you're a dungeon master and your players don't have this, you got a wizard or sorcerer or a cleric or druid or any spellcasting class in your game, you could have this and set it aside and just use it for like exotic spells that they may come across when they fight a wizard. So that you could have like some things that are completely unique, different from what is in the player's handbook. So again, pretty cool book. I consider it to be pretty much essential, along with like the player's handbook too. And another great one is the Magic Item Compendium. So this is just a collection of magic items. Similar to the Spell Compendium, it is a collection of books, or magic items from various books, magazines, and other resources, and it is, again, fantastic. The only thing to note with this is they redid the way they classify magic items, which may confuse you if you're trying to find certain things. In the 3.5 Dungeon Master's Guide, you had weapons, armors, potions, scrolls, staffs, wands, and rods, and rings, and then I think everything else was grouped under miscellaneous. So like your magical gauntlets, bracers, headbands, all that stuff would be just under miscellaneous, so it was this kind of a catch-all category. And this one, they actually break it down into like body slots. So it's a little bit jarring if you're used to the Dungeon Master's Guide, but there's still some really cool stuff in here. So again, I consider this to be really important. In fact, these two books here were also reprinted when Wizards of the Coast was doing the reprints back in 2012 and 2013. So there are newer versions of these books that have been released. Anyway, those are the ones that I consider to be, of the utmost importance, or the ones that you should probably look at first if you're looking to run 3.5. But there are a few other things that you can add in for extra flavor, so what we're going to do is have a look at those next. Alright, so now I want to talk about some of these more optional books, but these are ones that can kind of expand your flavor, or just options for the D&D game. I don't consider these to be essential, but a lot of these make for some interesting reads, and again, they add some interesting new abilities to the game. The first one I want to talk about is the Races series. So there was a book, there are a series of books that came out labeled, the Races of, and there were 5 in total. So I'm just going to show them off all here. This is just the collector's slipcover that came with the first 3. I actually ended up buying this separate from the books when I got them, but that's a whole different story. We'll just set that aside. So what we have are, in the order of their release, were Races of Stone, which feature dwarves, gnomes, and introduce the Goliath race. Races of Destiny, which is like half-elves, half-orcs, and I think these are called the Illumines, which is like a weird human race offshoot that has like these glowing sigils around their heads which do different things. And Race of the Wild, which are like elves, and what the other race? I think, was it Quickling that they added? There's a few different races. Each book tends to add a unique race as well. So we got elves, halflings, raptorins, which are flying creatures. And yeah, I guess that's the race that was added in there. So that's, oh yeah, the wings. I completely see it now. I don't know why I didn't. So those books are great. This is around the time that they started to shift their focus on writing decent flavor text. I think Race of Stone was still more conventional, but this one here has a lot of just great write-up on stuff. And I think where there are prestige classes, they're a little bit more fleshed out. Maybe not necessarily in this book, but this is around the time that they started to change that. And yeah, no, here it is. So they had things like how they interact in the world, playing it. So there's actually quite a few pages worth of description for them. So that's really cool. They also did Races of Eberron, which is done in a different style from the actual Eberron books. So I classify this as one of the races series and not necessarily an EPROM specific book. So this is pretty cool. It has like your Warforged, Shifters, Kalashtar I think is the other one. Again, I don't want to spend too much time. Yeah, Kalashtar, as well as some other races in there. So it's pretty cool. It's actually the book that got me hooked on and interested in Eberron in the first place. And then we've got Races of the Dragons. This has kobolds and Dragonborn, although they're different from what they were in later versions of the game. So the Dragonborn was, in this version, a racial template. So it would basically, you would start off as something else and you would be transformed into a Dragonborn by the god Bahamut. And then there's the spell scales as well, which is that one there. So that's pretty cool. So those are for the different races. There was a similar line of books for the different classes. So we're just going to go through them here. This is Complete Warrior, and they all had complete in the title. So Complete Warrior, just a guide to combat for all classes. Complete Divine. Complete Arcane. This one is a very worthwhile book to get, even if you don't get the other ones in the series. This one has some great stuff in here, like the War Mage, which was a class that was used a lot, actually, in various different campaigns that I played by different people. It's got some new spell options. It's just some really great stuff, arcane feats. This one is, of all the complete books, this is one of the ones that I recommend the most. Then you've got Complete Adventurer, and there's another complete book I'm going to set aside for now for a moment, but those 4 ones are probably the best of the series, as well as one other one that I would consider to be essential if you buy another book, which I'll get to in a moment. But then there were 3 more that were released, and I only have 2 of them. There's Complete Scoundrel, Complete Mage, and then Complete Champion. Now, I'm not going to lie, I found these 2 books to be not so great. All the other books, the 4 ones that came before it, the 5 ones actually that came before these, actually had all new complete core classes that went from level 1 to 20. These books don't have that, and I just wasn't really thrilled with the things that were in there. And Complete Mage especially disappointed me. Now, you know, if you buy this, may have a completely different reaction to it, but I was really disappointed with this. In fact, I was so disappointed with these 2 books that I didn't even bother getting Complete Champion. Now, I've heard Complete Champion's actually pretty decent. I don't own it. Maybe one of these days, if I can find it at a half-decent price, I'm not going to pay $40, $50 for it. But these 2 here are ones that I could say you could probably skip over. Alright, now the next thing I want to go into are some alternate rule systems. If you want to do something different, you know, you don't want to have just your standard classes, you want to have a few different unique things in here. There are definitely some books that can accommodate you for that. Starting off with the Expanded Psionics Handbook. Now this says expanded like you should have the first one to go along with it. You don't need the 3.0 Psionics Handbook, which was a terrible book. This one is absolutely awesome though. It really fixes a lot of the issues with psionics. You can now spend extra points on your powers to give them increased effects, instead of just basically dumping them for higher level versions of the same thing as you progress. So this book is absolutely great. Love it. If you're looking for something a little bit different, this is probably one of the first ones that I would recommend. I really wish this had gotten a reprint when they were going through and doing all those, but this book is absolutely awesome. And along those lines, here is Complete Psionics. So this is another fantastic book. This is probably the last great complete book that was released, in my opinion. Again, it just has some extra options, extra classes, and if you want to have psionics in your campaign, this is a really useful thing to have alongside of the Psionics Handbook. Alright, but other alternate systems were released for 3.5. One of the ones that I think is really underrated, but I really enjoyed, was Magic of Incarnum. So this is a system that essentially replaces magic items. It introduces the substance Essentia, which is like this just soul energy that, you know, permeates the world, and you can use it to shape into various things, and they occupy the same slots as magic items. There's basic versions of it that are just kind of like ethereal and don't hinder your ability to use magic items, but then there's other ones that you actually bind and they manifest physically. It's just a really cool idea. You spend points to give them more powers. It's just, to me, it's just such a cool system. I really liked it. I made a few NPCs for it, and I thought of some story ideas that would be great with it. You can take feats that allow you to have magic items and these chakra binds in the same slots, so it's just a really cool system. I think it's really underrated, and if you want something a little unique for magic items or to replace magic items, this is a really cool book to get. Speaking of magic items, there is Weapons of Legacy. So what this book is, it's a way of introducing powerful magic items early on in your D&D adventuring career by having them essentially gain power as you level. So you kind of bind yourself to it, and I'll just see if I can find just some descriptions here. Okay, so for example, you've got what happens here. So the wielder level. And basically, what you do is, as you level up, you can take penalties, and essentially take penalties to certain things, like attack penalties, hit point loss, or skill point loss, which is kind of a bad trade-off. I think there's a better way that they could have done this, but it's still pretty cool because, again, the items get more powerful as you progress. So you can introduce a really powerful item that the player characters have to unlock. And if you think something like that might be interesting, this is an absolutely fantastic book to get. One that's I'm on the fence about, but it does have a really cool cover, is Tome of Magic. So this has Pact, Shadow, and True Name Magic. These are 3 completely new systems for 3.5, and they're interesting, but I've never actually ended up using any of them. But if you're looking for some new types of magic, or if you're a dungeon master and you want something to make some truly unique or interesting NPCs, then this is a really great book to consider picking up. You are going to have to do some reading, though, because, again, these are whole new systems. They're completely different from anything that's come before it. So it's going to take some work, but if you're interested, this is an interesting book to pick up. And I realize I said interested and interesting way too much in that sentence. But anyway, another one that might be worth getting if you buy Weapons of Legacy is the Tome of Battle, the Book of 9 Swords. This just introduces some unique magics, systems, and I think this was a way, actually, in addition to like legacy weapons, this book also introduced things that would give fighters abilities more like what would end up happening in like 5th and 4th editions. So you got things like maneuvers and other things that the fighting classes can do that just fleshes them out. And actually, one of the things that's kind of cool, I actually like this inside cover because it's got this nice texture on it. And this is actually my favorite color, this kind of shade of dark purple. But this is a cool book. Again, it goes well with Weapons of Legacy, but there are some things that you can have in here that are unique. Like I said, if you want to give your fighter a bit more to do than just swing their weapons or fire their bows, then this book has those options in there. Alright, and the last one is Dragon Magic. Now, I'm not going to lie, this book has hardly ever been opened. This came out near the very end of 3.5's lifespan. But what it does is it just new character class options to draw on elements of draconic power. So there's things like, especially for sorcerer and stuff like that, you can really kind of flesh them out, which is pretty cool. So you get like aspects of like the dragon aspects that you can kind of take on, like magic, aspirants, which are classes or prestige classes, I think. And then you got your Dragonborn hero. So this is kind of an interesting one as well. I haven't really read it too much, so again, I don't know a whole lot about it. Anyway, moving on, the last few things I want to show here is 3.5 did have some really awesome monster ecology books, I guess you could call them. So, going through those, so most of them are absolutely fantastic. There's one that's not so great, but we'll start off with the first one that was released, the Draconomicon, the Book of Dragons. This thing is awesome. It has a lot of flavor on just dragons, going over like the different types, their identifiers, things that are unique about them, their layers. There's just so much cool stuff, some great feats and dragon magic spells. But what's also fantastic is towards the back, they actually have each of the dragons statted out, and by that I mean metallic and chromatic, but has them statted out for all of their age categories. So for example, you got like the red dragons here, green dragons, see if we got the picture. And what's cool is that they also show pictures of like the wormlings for most of these. and some of them can look pretty darn cute. Like, there we go. I mean, how is that not adorable? Anyway, this book is awesome. This is another one that I really wish they would have reprinted because of how fantastic it is. It's kind of pricey, I think, to get now, but if you want to use dragons or if you just want to read up on some of the awesome dragon lore, this book is amazing. Moving on to the one ecology book that I was really disappointed with, and that is Libris Mortis, the Book of Undead, or as some people have referred to it as, the Book of Bad Latin. But, this one I was really interested in this because, again, I was hoping for the same level of detail and information that was in the Draconomicon about various undead, because I love undead. It's one of my favorite monster types to use, and it doesn't have a lot of the things that I was hoping for. So, for example, like when you look at the different types of undead that it focuses on, it really doesn't go through a whole lot. I mean, it kind of goes over like skeletons and zombies and vampires and liches, but I don't even think it really touches on Death Knights, all that much, which is really, again, disappointing. It doesn't go into the depth that the Draconomicon went into, and to me, that was just kind of really disappointing. So if you're looking to get the ecology books, you can honestly probably skip this one. However, Wizards of the Coast got immediately back on track with Lords of Madness, the Book of Aberrations. So this contains two of my favorite monsters of all time, the Mind Flayer, and my absolute favorite monster ever, the Beholder. Now this book goes over, again, aberrations, and it goes into the kind of detail I was hoping that the Libris Mortis book would have gone into. So there's chapters on just the anatomy and life cycle and diet of beholders and mind flayers, and there's some really cool stuff in there. And in fact, I actually designed a whole adventure around the way that mind flayers procreate, which sounds gross, and it is gross, but not in the way that you're thinking. This book is absolutely awesome. If you're looking for, again, some monster ecology stuff, and you like, mind flayers, beholders, aboleths, things like that, this book is really worth picking up. All right, the next two I'm going to show off together here. These are the Fiendious Codexes 1 and 2, Hordes of the Abyss, and Tyrants of the Nine Hells. So these are basically the Book of Demons and the Book of Devils. Again, these are really great. One of my favorite things of all time that 3.5 ever did was the introductory chapter, in the preface, the Pact of Primeval, that explains how the Nine Hells were created in the first place, and just how twisted and manipulative Asmodeus is. These books are really cool. I really like them, and again, they just have some great information if you're going to use the planar stuff, fighting against demons and devils. And the last in the series is the Drought of the Underdark. So Drought are one of my favorite things to use as well. So this was a no-brainer. This was one of the last books. I think this was actually the last 3.5 book that I bought brand new. I think all the other ones that I ended up getting ended up being used. But this goes into a lot of great detail about, Drow culture, class structure, all kinds of great things. So this is, again, another fantastic book, especially if you want to run an Underdark theme setting and you like using Drow. This book is pretty fantastic. All right, so the last things that I want to talk about are some pre-written adventures or even a full-on campaign that came out for 3.5. 3.5 really focused more on supplements than adventures, so not a lot of adventures came out. There are some, but a lot of them are the thin paperbacks that are black and white. If you want something a little more substantial, I've got a few of them here. They did a series called Expedition, the Expedition series, and what they did is they essentially revisited classic modules. 4 were released in total. I only have the first 2, but what I have here is Expedition at Castle Ravenloft. So if you like Ravenloft, if you like the original adventure, or you just want to try playing something like this, this is a really cool adventure. This really captures a lot of the original Ravenloft feel. It does expand out more into the realm of Barovia as well than the original did. This is kind of the template that would be used for Curse of Strahd. The two are similar, but not quite the same. I think Curse of Strahd actually has more of Barovia in it, so it's a bit more expanded. But this is, again, a really cool adventure for characters at levels 6 through 10. Highly recommend it, especially if you're a Ravenloft fan. All right, and here we have Expedition to the Demon Web Pits. So this is the second one that came out. Basically, in this one, you're going up against the Aspect of Lolth. And I think this is sort of an update of a classic module. The name of it escapes me at this point in time, but there was one where you actually went to confront Lolth herself in like original first edition AD&D. So this is sort of an updated version of that. In addition, there are two more that were released. There was Expedition to the Ruins of Undermountain and Expedition to Castle Greyhawk, and I don't have those. I was kind of burnt out on buying books when these came out, and I had so many adventures and campaigns to run that I just really didn't feel justified in buying more of them. So those ones are out there as well, and hopefully one of these days again I can find them at a half decent price. I've seen them going for like $40, $50, and again I'm not going to pay that much for used books. But the last thing I want to talk about is an actual full-on campaign. Now this was not produced or published by Wizards of the Coast, but it is an official Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 campaign. It came out in Dungeon Magazine, and it is Shackled City. So this came out in hardcover form. Paizo Publishing in Dungeon Magazine did 3 different campaigns. There was Shackled City, Age of Worms, and Savage Tide. This was the only one, unfortunately, that received a hardcover treatment. It actually began as a 3.0 adventure. The update or the revision occurred while these were being produced, but this actually updates everything to 3.5. And it introduces or updates a lot of things. It fleshes out some aspects of the adventure as well. So this is actually really great. This goes from levels 1 all the way up through 20. So if you're looking to have a campaign, a full-on campaign, this is a great way to go as well. So anyway, these are some of the suggestions that I have for 3.5 if you're interested in going and purchasing that version of the game. I hope you enjoyed it, and what I'll do now is just move over to my final thoughts on buying stuff for 3.5. Alright, so that was my look at Dungeons & Dragons 3.5. I hope you found some of the suggestions useful. There's a couple other things I want to touch on before we end this video. So the first thing is the difference between the original printing of these books and then the 2012 reprints that were done. So the 2012 reprints, if you can find these, I would probably recommend getting them if you can get them at a decent price. They are newer, so hopefully they'll be easier to come by. Some bookstores may even still have them in stock. But what's great about this is that it incorporates a lot of the errata that was in 3.5 into the core books, the Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master Guide, and the Monster Manual. But the back of the book, in the Player's Handbook especially, has a little section here just on the Polymorph Subschool. I don't know how well it's going to show up, but the Polymorph series of spells and abilities underwent so many changes and edits and revisions throughout the course of 3.5 that it got really confusing towards the end. So this version has information on the Polymorph Subschool, as I show the front cover, not the back of the cover. So if you get this, at least the Player's Handbook, if you can get this, if you want to play like a druid or somebody who plans on using the polymorph spell, then this would be the version to pick up. Otherwise, it's really not that different. Like, they don't add extra pages worth of stuff or material or information. This is just something that would have been done on the back cover page that was blank in the last version. But it is worth looking into if you want to do stuff along those lines. Now, the last thing that I should mention when it comes to Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 would have to be Paizo Publishing's version, Pathfinder. So this came out after 3.5 was discontinued. This came out shortly after the release of 4th edition D&D. But what this does is it uses the 3.5 Open Gaming license, and it expands on 3.5 Dungeons & Dragons. The reason that I might recommend this over any of the other stuff is just because this is still currently in print. So it's a lot easier to find. The first book combines the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide all into one. There's a whole host of books that have come out for Pathfinder as well. I don't have very many. I only have one actual other Pathfinder product, which is the Advanced Player's Guide. Because I wasn't really looking to run Pathfinder, I wasn't really looking to collect for it. But it is worth mentioning that if you want to play 3.5 and you're finding a lot of the other books a bit too expensive or hard to find, there is this alternative as well. So anyway, I hope you guys really enjoyed the video. I hope it helped if you're looking to get back into Dungeons & Dragons 3.5. And please be sure to come back for the next part where I'm going to be looking at what to pick up if you're interested in playing Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. Until then.